Okay, picture this. You're driving down a highway, maybe somewhere remote. You look out the window and you see them. Those huge skeletal high voltage towers just marching across the landscape.
The backbone of the power grid.
Exactly. And strung between them are these super thick, heavy industrial cables. ACSRs, I think they're called.
Aluminum conductor, steel reinforced, yeah.
Now, I want you to imagine a mountain of those old wires, just a massive heap of them sitting in some dusty scrapyard, twisted, oxidized metal.
To those people, that's just junk. It's, a waste management problem waiting to happen.
Right, but that pile of junk actually kicked off a legal war that went all the way to the Supreme Court of the Philippines. And it wasn't just about recycling prices, no, this blew up into a massive constitutional showdown. We're talking about discrimination, secret government rules, and whether you, as a business owner, have a fundamental right to buy the government's trash.
It sounds so specific, but it really gets to a tough question. Does the Constitution guarantee a completely free market where, anyone can bid on anything?
Or can the government play favorites? Can they pick and choose if they say it's for the greater good?
And that is exactly what we're unpacking today.
We are doing a deep dive into the case of the National Power Corporation versus Pinatubo commercial. We've got the court decision, the relevant laws, all the context on why this scrap metal fight matters so much.
And our mission here really is to figure out how the Supreme Court balances the rights of a private company against the government's need to maintain order. It's that classic liberty versus security debate, just, disguised as a scrap metal auction.
So let's set the stage. Who are the players here? In one corner, you have the National Power Corporation, the NPC.
They're the government entity. They run the power assets.
And like any big utility, they're always doing maintenance. They end up with tons of this scrap ACSR wire. They need to get rid of it to, and this is a quote, decongest and maintain good housekeeping.
Which is just corporate jargon for, our warehouse is full, let's sell this stuff and make a few bucks.
Exactly. So that's the seller. And in the other corner, you have Pinatubo Commercial.
They're a private trading company. The middlemen. They buy scrap copper, aluminum, you name it, and they sell it on for a profit. They looked at that pile of NPC wire and saw a great deal.
It seems so simple. Seller has stuff, buyer has money, capitalism 101. But when Pinatubo tried to bid, the NPC basically told them to get lost.
They slammed the door. NPC had issued this very specific Rule Circular Number 9975, and it explicitly banned traders.
Banned them.
Yeah, they said, we will only sell this scrap to manufacturers. So only to companies that would actually take the wires, melt them down, and turn them into something new.
Wow. Okay, so Pinatubo obviously didn't just walk away. They sued. And their argument, on the surface, it sounds pretty strong.
It does. They said, this is unconstitutional. You're discriminating against us just because we're traders. You're restraining free trade.
And here's the kicker. You did this with a rule you never even published.
That secret rule argument is so important. And here's the twist. Pinatubo actually won at first. The lower court, the regional trial court, sided with them. They voided the NPC's rule. But the NPC appealed, and that's when it went to the Supreme Court. And that's where we get this incredible lesson on the limits of a free market.
Okay, so let's peel this onion. The Supreme Court had to take down 3 separate arguments. The first one Pinatubo threw at them was due process.
Right. This is fundamental legal stuff.
The argument being, hey, you changed the rules of the game with this circular, but you didn't tell anybody.
This all goes back to a really famous legal precedent, a case called Tañada versus Tuvera. The long and short of it is, laws have to be published to be valid.
You can't expect people to follow a law they don't know exists.
Exactly. It's a protection against tyranny. If the government makes a law in secret, how can it be binding on you?
It makes total sense. If the speed limit changes, but there's no new sign and it's not published anywhere, how can they give me a ticket? It feels like a trap.
That was Pinatubo's logic. They said, because this Circular 9975 wasn't published in the official gazette or a newspaper, it was a secret law and couldn't be enforced.
But the Supreme Court didn't buy that argument. Why not?
Well, the court made a very sharp distinction. They separated laws that affect the general public from internal rules that just guide an agency's own staff.
Okay, break that down for us. Because this rule clearly affected Pinatubo.
Think of it like this. If the government passes a health code saying all restaurants must wash hands, that's a law. It applies to everyone. It has to be published.
Got it.
But if a restaurant manager writes a memo to his cooks that says, from now on, we're only using brand X olive oil, that's internal.
And the customers don't need to be officially notified about the olive oil change.
Exactly. The court looked at the circular and said, look, this is a directive from the NPC president to his own people. It's telling the disposal committee how to do its job. It's internal housekeeping.
But I have to push back a little. It did affect the public, or at least a part of it. It stopped Pinatubo from doing business. That feels pretty external.
It's a gray area, for sure. The court said the effect was remote, indirect, and incidental. But the real knockout punch for the due process argument wasn't just the memo. It was about the nature of bidding itself.
I saw this phrase come up a lot in the decision, the right to bid.
Hmm.
Or maybe the lack of a right.
This is a really harsh reality check for any business that wants to work with the government. The Supreme Court was crystal clear. You do not have a constitutional right to bid on government contracts.
So nobody is entitled to get the government's business?
Correct. Bidding is what the law calls an invitation to contract. The government owns the wires. It's their property. It's like you selling your own car. You can set the terms.
So I can say, I'm only selling this car to a classic car enthusiast, even if someone else offers me more money.
Yes. It's your car, your rules.
Yeah.
The court said participation in government bidding is a privilege, not a property right. You can't demand to be part of the auction if you don't meet the criteria set by the owner.
So because Pinatubo never had a right to the contract in the first place, the government didn't violate their due process by setting these internal rules.
That's it. You can't complain about the party rules if you weren't even on the guest list.
Sure.
So the lack of publication wasn't the deal breaker, but that was just the appetizer. The main course of this case is the equal protection argument.
This is the one that I think feels most intuitive. Equal protection just sounds like fairness.
Yeah.
If I have the money and the factory has the money, why is their money better than mine?
It feels like discrimination.
Exactly. And Pinatubo argued that the classification, this dividing line between manufacturers and traders, was arbitrary, that the NPC was just picking winners and losers for no good reason.
And under the Equal Protection Clause, the government usually can't do that. They can't just treat people differently without a valid reason.
Usually.
But here's the nuance that trips people up. Equal protection doesn't mean universal, absolute equality. It doesn't mean everyone is treated exactly the same. It means people in similar circumstances are treated similarly.
So you can treat adults differently than children for, say, voting.
Perfect example. The law calls it classification, and you're allowed to classify groups as long as that classification is reasonable.
And reasonable is the key word. What makes it reasonable? Because to Pinatubo, this felt completely unreasonable.
The court has a test for that. It has to be based on substantial distinctions. It has to be relevant or germane to the purpose of the law. It can't just be random.
So what was the logic? Why did the NPC shut out the traders? This is where the story goes from like a boring corporate dispute to a crime drama.
This is the big reveal, the aha moment. The Supreme Court looked at the context. Specifically, they looked at Republic Act 7832, which is the Anti-Electricity Pilferage Act of 1994.
Pilferage. That's a very polite word for theft.
Rampant theft. We are talking about an epidemic. Organized criminal groups were climbing these massive towers, cutting down live high-voltage cables and stealing miles of wire.
That sounds insane. Incredibly dangerous.
Deadly. And incredibly costly. It was causing huge blackouts, millions in damages. So the thieves steal the wire. But then what? You can't eat copper wire.
You have to sell it.
You have to fence it. And who do they sell it to?
Scrap traders. Oh, I see where this is going.
If the NPC sells their legal scrap to traders and the thieves sell their stolen scrap to traders,
You end up with a big pile of mixed wire. Some legal, some illegal.
the court called it the commingling problem. It's basically money laundering, but for metal.
Right, so if the police raid a trader's warehouse, the trader just pulls out their NPC receipt and says, "What's the problem, officer? I bought this legally."
And it becomes impossible to prove which wire was stolen from a tower last night and which was bought at an auction last week. The legal sale provides the perfect cover for the black market.
So the traders, even the totally honest ones, become part of the problem. They provide the camouflage for the criminals.
That was the court's assessment. Now, compare that with the manufacturers.
They're the end of the line. They melt it down.
Exactly. If a manufacturer buys the scrap, it goes into a furnace, it becomes liquid metal, it turns into engine parts or window frames or whatever. The wire is gone.
The trail ends.
The trail ends. The evidence is destroyed, but in a productive way. So from the NPC's perspective, selling to a manufacturer is safe. It takes the target item out of circulation. Selling to a trader just keeps it in circulation, which fuels the theft.
Wow, that That completely reframes the whole thing. It's not NPC hates middlemen. It's NPC is trying to stop the power grid from being torn apart.
And that is precisely why the Supreme Court ruled the classification was reasonable. It was directly related to the purpose of stopping a crime wave. It wasn't arbitrary discrimination. It was a strategic move to protect public property.
So they basically sacrificed the commercial rights of one group, the traders, to secure the national infrastructure.
It all comes back to a core government function called police power. The state has the authority to restrict certain liberties to promote the general welfare. And in this case, the welfare of having electricity outweighed Pinatubo's desire to trade scrap metal.
So Pinatubo lost on due process. They lost big on equal protection. They had one last card to play: free trade.
This is their Hail Mary pass. They pointed to the Government Procurement Reform Act, which talks a lot about competitiveness.
And their argument was, look, by kicking us out, you're making the auction less competitive. Fewer bidders means a lower price for the government. That's against the spirit of the law.
And on paper, that's true. Basic economics says more bidders usually drives up the price. The NPC probably made less money on the scrap by banning an entire class of buyers.
But the Supreme Court had a very sharp answer for this.
They did. They had to define what competitiveness really means in a government contract. And it does not mean a free-for-all.
It doesn't.
No. The court said competitiveness means giving an equal opportunity to all eligible and qualified bidders.
Eligible. There's the catch.
There's the catch. The government gets to set the eligibility criteria. And if you don't meet them, in this case being a manufacturer who will destroy the wire, then you aren't part of the competition to begin with.
And since we just established that the criteria was reasonable because of the theft problem.
Exactly. But the court went even further. They dropped this sort of philosophical bomb about our economy. They said, point blank, that the Constitution does not guarantee a market of pure and unadulterated competition.
I remember this quote. The language was so vivid.
It was. They said the Philippines does not follow a hands-off policy or the rule of let the devil devour the hindmost.
Let the devil devour the hindmost. That's an old one. It basically means survival of the fittest, right? Every man for himself.
Total free-for-all. The strong eat the weak, and the government just watches. The court is saying, that is not us. We are not a Wild West anarcho-capitalist state. The Constitution protects free enterprise, yes, but it always reserves the power for the government to step in.
To intervene for the public good.
Right, to stop what they called the pernicious practice of trafficking stolen goods, even if it messes with the market. The goal wasn't just to make the most money. The goal was to stop the crime.
That's such an important distinction. The government isn't just another company trying to maximize profit. It has other bigger responsibilities.
It has to care about the consequences.
So let's put it all together. The Supreme Court granted the NPC's petition. They overturned the lower court. The circular is valid.
Pinatubo lost. It's manufacturers only. The traders are locked out.
It's a tough outcome for Pinatubo for sure, but when you walk through the court's logic, it's solid.
It really is. It's a lesson that in the hierarchy of the law, public welfare sits above private profit.
So let's boil it down. What are the big takeaways for someone listening who wants to understand how these decisions get made?
Okay, first, the internal rule exception. Not every government memo is a national law. If it's just about internal housekeeping, managing their own assets, it probably doesn't need to be on the front page of the paper.
Okay, second.
Bidding is a privilege, not a right. This is huge. You have no fundamental right to a government contract. The government is the owner, and they get to set the guest list for the party.
And the third, and this feels like the most important one.
Context justifies classification. You can treat different groups differently. You can discriminate, in the legal sense, as long as you have a very good, reasonable reason. And here, stopping an epidemic of infrastructure theft was a very good reason.
It really challenges that simple idea that free trade is this absolute untouchable thing. It's not. It has to operate within the bounds of public order.
The market serves society, not the other way around.
Which brings us to a final thought to leave you with. In this case, the security risk was stolen wires. So the government cut out the middlemen, the traders, and forced a direct supply chain to the end users, the manufacturers.
It worked for scrap metal. But where else could that logic apply?
Exactly. I mean, think about the digital world. Could the government use a national security argument to restrict who can buy and sell, say, server hardware or critical data?
Or what about medicine? Could they ban distributors and force hospitals to buy drugs directly from the big pharma companies to stop counterfeits? That would wipe out an entire industry of medical suppliers.
So at what point does a reasonable classification to ensure security become an unfair monopoly that just ends up hurting everyone else? If they can do it for wires, can they do it for food, for fuel?
That's the tension. That line between protecting the public and picking winners is always going to be a battlefield.
Something to think about the next time you see a power line. Thanks for diving deep with us on this constitutional scrap metal saga.
My pleasure.
We'll see you on the next deep dive.